Ambassador James Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his formal diplomatic attire as the massive doors to the Galactic Council's high chamber swung open. The circular room sparkled with crystalline architecture, delegates from 37 spacefaring civilizations seated in ascending tiers. Harrison took his place at the modest Earth delegation platform, trying not to feel intimidated by the towering Morgosa representatives or the floating gas sphere containment suits of the Halusian diplomats. The royal court of the Zalaxian Empire presents His Supreme Majesty, King Thrax the Unyielding, announced a metallic voice from hidden speakers. The blue-skinned monarch strode into the chamber, his ceremonial armor gleaming with iridescent scales. Harrison had met the king only once before during trade negotiations, but even from a distance, he could see the monarch's features were strained today, his characteristic confidence replaced by something colder. Behind him walked a small figure in simple white robes. A child, Harrison realized with surprise. Zalaxian royals never brought their offspring to council proceedings. Esteemed delegates, King Thrax's voice boomed without amplification, I come before you to perform a necessary duty for the genetic hygiene of the Zalaxian royal lineage. The chamber fell silent. Even the typically chatty Vortak delegates stopped their constant whispering. I present before you Princess Nixara, my fifth-born, Thrax continued, gesturing to the small figure who stepped forward. Our genetic monitoring has confirmed persistent anomalies in her neurological development that render her unsuitable for royal lineage. Harrison studied the young princess. She appeared to be about 12 in human equivalent years, her skin a lighter shade of blue than her father's, with delicate facial ridges that would sharpen with maturity. Unlike the king's rigid posture, she seemed to almost curl inward, eyes downcast. The anomaly manifests as excessive empathic response and questioning of established hierarchies, Thrax declared as if describing a particularly virulent disease. Such traits are incompatible with Zalaxian leadership genetics. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Most species considered empathy a virtue, not a defect, but the Zalaxians had long engineered their ruling class for tactical brilliance and unwavering decisiveness at the expense of emotional capacity. As is our custom, the king continued, defective royal offspring must be removed from succession and reproposed through genetic reprocessing. Harrison stiffened. Genetic reprocessing was a sanitized term for a procedure that would essentially erase Nixara's personality and reprogram her as a loyal servant. It was technically not execution, but the person she was would cease to exist. For the first time, the princess looked up, scanning the chamber with intelligent eyes that betrayed fear, but also a spark of desperate hope. Her gaze locked with Harrison's for just a moment, and something inexplicable passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or simply the basic human instinct to protect a child in danger. Guards, escort Princess Nixara to the reprocessing transport, King Thrax ordered. Before Harrison could think better of it, he was on his feet. I invoke Article 7 of the Sentient Protection Accord, he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The human invokes protective custody. The Zalaxian First Minister looked incredulous. Article 7 permits diplomatic representatives to claim political asylum for individuals facing irreversible biological alteration due to genetic or ideological differences, Harrison stated, thanking his lucky stars for his eidetic memory of diplomatic protocols. King Thrax's eyes narrowed dangerously. You dare interfere in Zalaxian royal matters. I dare uphold Galactic Council principles that your empire signed, Harrison replied, maintaining diplomatic language while his palms sweated. The first chuckle came from the Dravid ambassador, then spread through the chamber like wildfire. Soon half the council was openly laughing. The human wishes to adopt a defective Zalaxian royal. How quaint, sneered a hegemony representative. Harrison stood his ground as mocking laughter echoed around him. Princess Nixara looked at him with wide, disbelieving eyes, clearly unable to comprehend why a stranger, a human, no less, would intercede on her behalf. King Thrax's face had darkened to a dangerous indigo, but even he recognized the political consequences of violating council procedure. "Very well," he finally hissed. "Take the defective creature. Your primitive species may be well suited to raise damaged goods." Harrison descended from the Earth platform, crossing the chamber floor with measured steps. As he approached Nixara, he knelt to her level. "My name is James Harrison," he said softly. "If you wish, you may come with me to Earth." The princess looked back at her father's cold gaze, then to Harrison's outstretched hand. With trembling fingers, she reached out. The Galactic Council laughed, but James Harrison had just changed the course of galactic history with a single act of compassion. "This substance is unacceptable," Nixara declared, pushing away the plate of scrambled eggs with one slender blue finger. Her facial ridges flushed a deeper cerulean with what Harrison had learned was the Zolaxian equivalent of disgust. Harrison sighed, adding the eggs to a growing mental list of failed breakfast attempts. In the 3 weeks since they'd arrived at his modest apartment in the diplomatic quarter of New Seattle, they'd established precisely 2 foods Nixara would consume: plain rice and a particular brand of apple juice. "The nutrition supplement packets from the Zolaxian embassy will arrive this afternoon," he said, trying to sound encouraging while silently cursing the bureaucratic delays. "Until then, perhaps more rice." Nixara straightened her already perfect posture. A properly conditioned roidal can sustain optimal function without nutrient intake for 72 hours. Harrison carefully kept his expression neutral. These casual references to the brutal conditioning of Zolaxian royal children never failed to disturb him. "Well, humans need to eat more frequently," he said, preparing his own breakfast. "And properly conditioned or not, you're still growing." Nixara watched him with sharp, analytical eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Harrison had converted his home office into a bedroom for her, but she kept it militarily neat, sleeping on top of the blankets rather than under them, and refusing any decorative touches. The doorbell chimed, interrupting their standoff. "Identification protocol," Nixara asked immediately, tension visible in her shoulders. "It's okay," Harrison reassured her, noting how she still expected threats from all directions. "Probably just my sister," she mentioned, stopping by. Harrison opened the door to find Ellie standing there in her civilian clothes, though she never quite lost the military bearing from her years in Earth's special forces. "So this is the princess," Ellie said without preamble, studying Nixara with the same direct gaze the young Zolaxian was giving her. "Ellie, meet Nixara." "Nixara, this is my sister Eleanor Harrison." "You have combat training," Nixara observed, noticing the subtle way Ellie had assessed all exit points upon entering. 15 years special operations," Ellie confirmed. "You have combat potential yourself. Good awareness." Something almost like pride flickered across Nixara's face before she suppressed it. "All royals receive tactical training from infancy." Ellie nodded approvingly before turning to her brother. "This place is a disaster, Jamie. No wonder you're both struggling." "We're managing fine," Harrison protested weakly, looking around at the cluttered apartment with dishes piled in the sink and diplomatic documents scattered across every surface. "You need structure," Ellie declared, setting down her bag and rolling up her sleeves. "The kid's from a regimented culture. You can't expect her to adapt to your chaos overnight." Before Harrison could object, Ellie had begun reorganizing the living room, giving Nixara small tasks as she worked. To his surprise, the princess complied without complaint, seemingly relieved by the clear instructions and defined expectations. By afternoon, the apartment was transformed. Ellie had established a schedule posted on the refrigerator, dividing household duties between them and creating a daily routine that balanced Zolaxian precision with human flexibility. "The princess needs physical activity," Ellie informed Harrison as Nixara meticulously arranged books on a shelf. "I'll pick her up tomorrow at 800 for morning exercises." That night, as Harrison passed Nixara's room, he heard a crash followed by a small gasp. He found her standing frozen beside his grandmother's antique pendulum clock, now shattered on the floor. "I was examining its mechanical properties," she said, voice tight with fear. "I accept whatever disciplinary action you deem appropriate." She stood rigidly, eyes forward, clearly expecting physical punishment. The realization made Harrison's stomach turn. "It's just a clock, Nixura," he said gently, kneeling to pick up the pieces. "Accidents happen." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "You are not angry?" "Disappointed about the clock, yes. But not at you." He smiled, offering her the dustpan. "Help me clean up." Nixura hesitantly took the dustpan, studying Harrison's face as if searching for hidden meanings. Outside the window, a small drone from the Zolaxian embassy hovered momentarily before darting away into the night, its recording lights blinking steadily. 6 months after her arrival on Earth, Nixura sat perfectly still in the third row of the new Seattle Symphony Hall, her eyes fixed on the stage where the orchestra arranged their instruments. Harrison watched her from the corner of his eye, wondering if this experiment had been a mistake. Zolaxian education considered artistic pursuits a wasteful indulgence, and Nixura's expression remained unreadable as the conductor raised his baton. The first notes of Holst's Jupiter filled the hall, and Harrison felt rather than saw Nixura stiffen beside him. As the music swelled, he risked another glance and was startled to see thin purple tracks running down her blue cheeks. Zolaxian tears, something he'd never witnessed before. "Nixura," he whispered, "are you all right? We can leave if—" "This sensation," she interrupted, her voice barely audible. "Is it emotion sickness?" Harrison smiled gently. "No, it's called being moved by beauty. It's completely normal." "It is permitted?" she asked, her fingers gripping the armrest. "More than permitted, it's celebrated." When they returned home, Nixura immediately retreated to her room. Harrison heard nothing until the following morning when he woke to the sound of humming, perfectly pitched notes matching the symphony's theme from the previous night. He found Nixura in the kitchen, attempting to prepare what looked like toast, the melody continuing unconsciously as she worked. "You have perfect pitch," he observed casually, trying not to make her self-conscious. Nixura stopped abruptly. "Is that another defect?" "It's a rare gift. Most musicians would envy you." 2 weeks later, Harrison enrolled her in music theory classes, which she approached with the same disciplined precision she applied to everything. Her teacher, Ms. Chen, called Harrison after the third lesson. "She has extraordinary talent," Ms. Chen told him. "But she keeps asking if she's doing it correctly, as if music has only one right answer." At the International Preparatory Academy, where Nixura attended regular classes, her integration proved more challenging. The other alien students knew of her status as the defective Zolaxian princess, and human children found her formality intimidating. Harrison received the call from the principal during a diplomatic briefing. "There's been an incident," Principal Okafor explained. "But before you worry, Nixura isn't in trouble." Harrison arrived to find Nixura sitting calmly outside the principal's office, beside a small Arcturan child with iridescent skin who looked up at her with obvious admiration. She defended Trill from 3 older students, Principal Okafor explained quietly. "They were mocking his transitional membrane. Your daughter used what I can only describe as perfect diplomatic language, while simultaneously making it very clear what would happen if they continued their behavior." "She's not technically my daughter," Harrison corrected automatically. Principal Okafor raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps you should tell her that." That weekend, Harrison took Nixura camping in the Cascade Mountains, something his own father had done with him. As night fell and stars appeared overhead, Nixura stared upward with uncharacteristic wonder. "They look different from here," she said softly. "On royal vessels, we only observe stars through tactical displays." "What do you think of them now?" Harrison asked, stoking their small campfire. Nixura was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. "They make me question things," she finally admitted. "On Zolaxia, Questioning is discouraged. On Earth, it's how we learn and grow, Harrison replied. My first tutor was replaced when I asked why Zalaxians altered our emotional capacity 1,000 years ago, she said suddenly. No one would answer. Harrison carefully kept his expression neutral despite his surprise at this historical revelation. What other questions weren't you allowed to ask? As Nixara cautiously began to voice long-suppressed curiosities, neither noticed the small observation drone hovering at the edge of the forest, its recording light blinking steadily in the darkness as it transmitted back to the Galactic Council. The human continues his peculiar investment in the defective Zalaxian, with no apparent strategic advantage. The notification chimed while Harrison was pouring coffee. Nixara, now 14 in human equivalent years, froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth, a habit from her royal training that allowed her to process unexpected information before reacting. What is it? She asked, her voice carefully neutral, though Harrison had learned to recognize the subtle darkening of her facial ridges that signaled anxiety. Harrison scanned the diplomatic communiqué, his expression tightening. A Zalaxian delegation is requesting an official visit. They'll arrive tomorrow. Nixara set down her spoon with perfect precision. What is their stated purpose? To observe your development as a cultural study on cross-species adaptation. Harrison read, not bothering to hide his skepticism. In the 2 years since bringing Nixara to Earth, the Zalaxian Empire had shown no interest in her welfare beyond mandatory status reports to the Galactic Council. They wish to document my failure, Nixara said matter-of-factly. Harrison looked up sharply. You haven't failed at anything. By Zalaxian standards, I have compromised extensively. I consume non-standard nutrition. I engage in musical activities. I express occasional emotional responses. Her tone was analytical, but Harrison noticed how she straightened her already perfect posture, reverting to royal bearing. Will you refuse them? She asked. Harrison wished he could. They're within their rights to request an observation visit. If I refuse, they could petition the council to review your custody arrangement. Nixara nodded once. I will prepare appropriately. The following day, 3 Zalaxian officials arrived at Harrison's apartment in identical formal attire, their blue skin adorned with the subtle scarification that denoted high governmental rank. Their leader, Sub-Minister Kren, barely acknowledged Harrison before fixing his gaze on Nixara. Princess Nixara, present yourself for evaluation, he commanded. Harrison bristled at the tone but remained silent as Nixara stepped forward and performed an elaborate Zalaxian greeting ritual with flawless precision. The officials exchanged surprised glances. You maintain protocol knowledge despite your situation, Sub-Minister Kren observed. Ambassador Harrison ensures I receive comprehensive education in both Zalaxian and Terran traditions. Nixara replied in high formal Zalaxian, her pronunciation perfect. The delegation spent hours observing and questioning Nixara about her daily routines, education, and activities. Harrison watched with growing pride as she navigated their thinly veiled condescension with diplomatic grace beyond her years. The tension peaked during a tour of the diplomatic quarter gardens. One official, examining Nixara's school achievements displayed on Harrison's tablet, asked, Do you attribute your educational performance to human methodology, or despite it? I find the integration of analytical Zalaxian approaches with creative human perspectives creates optimal learning outcomes. Nixara replied carefully. The official's expression soured. You sound increasingly human. Has your guardian's primitive emotionalism infected your reasoning? Harrison stepped forward. Nixara consistently places in the top percentile of both human and non-human assessment metrics. Her performance speaks for itself. We address the princess, not you, the tallest delegate said dismissively, deliberately stepping between them and accidentally shoving Harrison backward with enough force to make him stumble. What happened next occurred too quickly for Harrison to fully process. Nixara moved in a blur of motion, executing a perfect defensive maneuver that redirected the delegate's momentum away from Harrison, while simultaneously establishing a protective stance. Physical aggression against a diplomatic representative violates Section 12 of the Interspecies Contact Protocols, she stated calmly, though her eyes had darkened to deep indigo, a sign of intense emotion in Zolaxians. The delegation stared in shocked silence. Such combat training was reserved for royal security forces, not princesses. You've been instructing her in military arts. Sub-Minister Kren demanded of Harrison. Before Harrison could respond, the apartment door opened and Ellie walked in, stopping short at the tableau before her. Training session canceled today, Princess, she asked casually, her special forces bearing unmistakable. Sub-Minister Kren's expression shifted from outrage to calculation. This encounter will be reported to the homeworld, as will the unprovoked aggression against Ambassador Harrison. Nixara countered in perfect high diplomatic Zolaxian, proposing a face-saving solution that acknowledged fault on both sides while preserving diplomatic relations. The delegation departed within the hour. As their transport lifted off, Harrison discovered encrypted transmissions had been sent throughout their visit. What do you think they really wanted? He asked Ellie as they watched Nixara meticulously return the apartment to its normal state, erasing all traces of the visitors. Information, Ellie replied quietly. Question is, for whom? Because that wasn't standard diplomatic surveillance equipment they were carrying. The Junior Diplomatic Summit is a tremendous honor, Harrison admitted, watching 16-year-old Nixara carefully fold her formal attire into a travel case. Her movements were efficient, each garment precisely aligned, a blend of Zolaxian precision and the personal touches she had developed during 4 years on Earth. The Galactic Council rarely invites representatives below senior rank, he continued, leaning against her doorframe. Your proposal on multilingual education protocols impressed them. Nixara's facial ridges flushed slightly darker blue, her equivalent of a modest blush. Your guidance was invaluable. Don't sell yourself short. That was your work. Harrison hesitated before adding, I'm proud of you. Nixara paused, still unused to direct emotional expressions despite years on Earth. I will represent both Earth and Zolaxia with appropriate dignity. Harrison smiled at her diplomatic phrasing, recognizing it as her way of processing the compliment. The Arcturan delegation specifically requested your participation in the resource-sharing panel. Your reputation is growing. Is that why you seem concerned? Nixara asked, her perception uncomfortably accurate as usual. Harrison considered deflecting but decided against it. Their relationship was built on honesty. It's probably nothing. Just be careful. The timing of this invitation, so soon after the Zolaxian delegation's report, feels convenient. You believe it may be a trap. I think certain parties might have multiple agendas. Nixara closed her case with a decisive click. As you've taught me, sometimes the best defense is to succeed so thoroughly that opposition becomes self-defeating. The neutral space station hosting the Junior Diplomatic Summit orbited a gas giant in unclaimed territory, its sleek architecture designed to accommodate delegates from 27 species. Nixara navigated the complex protocols with natural ease, her unique background allowing her to bridge cultural gaps that had stymied previous summits. During the opening session, she sat between a Trevisian representative with crystalline appendages and a telepathic Medusan delegate who required specialized translation technology. By the end of the first day, she had brokered a tentative dialogue between the historically adversarial species. Your ability to conceptualize multidimensional communication pathways is unprecedented, the Trevisian delegate commented during the evening reception. I find value in examining both logical structures and emotional resonances, Nixara replied, carefully balancing her Zolaxian analytical training with the emotional intelligence she had developed on Earth. By the summit's third day, Nixara had become the unexpected focal point for several breakthrough discussions. Her proposed framework for resource sharing between the Arcturus system and the Rigelian coalition, ancient enemies with mutually exclusive negotiation styles, earned her a special commendation from the Galactic Council's observer. The human-raised Zolaxian demonstrates unique integrative thinking, the observer noted in his official record. Perhaps defective is not the appropriate classification. During the closing ceremony, as Nixera accepted the summit's recognition award, the station's lights flickered momentarily. Security protocols initiated automatically, but not before four masked figures in stealth suits materialized in the chamber. Targeted extraction only, one commanded as they moved with military precision toward Nixera. The summit security forces responded too slowly, their weapons ineffective against the intruder's advanced shielding technology. Zolaxian military-grade protection, Nixera realized with shock. As two attackers seized her arms, a stun pulse disabled the room's other occupants. Nixera maintained her royal composure despite her racing heart, analyzing her options as they dragged her toward a shimmering portal that had appeared in the chamber wall. Your genetic anomalies will be properly addressed at the reeducation facility, one attacker informed her clinically. The Empire cannot allow a defective royal to continue spreading disruptive ideologies. Just before they reached the portal, the station's emergency bulkheads slammed down, cutting off their escape route. Alarms blared as the station's security system overrode standard protocols. Unauthorized intrusion detected, the station AI announced. Emergency response activated. From a maintenance hatch nearby, a familiar figure emerged with remarkable stealth for a human diplomat. Harrison, armed with a modified pulse disruptor, moved with a precision that revealed his sister's training influence. "I believe," he said calmly, aiming the weapon, "you're interfering with my daughter's award ceremony. You understand this visit carries significant risk." Harrison cautioned as their diplomatic transport descended through Zolaxia's upper atmosphere. The crystalline spires of the capital city, Kalturax, gleamed below them, their geometric precision a stark contrast to Earth's organic architecture. Nixera stood at the viewport, her reflection revealing an outwardly calm demeanor that belied the rapid pulse visible at her throat. At 17, she had grown into a striking young woman whose bearing combined royal Zolaxian dignity with a distinctly human openness in her gaze. "The Council's censure of the kidnapping attempt provides diplomatic protection," she replied, adjusting the formal Zolaxian attire she hadn't worn in 5 years. "But it doesn't guarantee our safety." Following the failed abduction at the Junior Diplomatic Summit, Harrison had leveraged the incident into a formal investigation. The evidence of Zolaxian military technology in the attack had forced the Empire to deny official involvement, while offering a diplomatic invitation to the annual Ascension Festival as recompense. "Your brother Thrax IV now leads the welcoming committee," Harrison noted, reviewing the updated protocol briefing. "Your father appears to be limiting public appearances." Nixera's facial ridges darkened slightly. "Illness is considered weakness in the royal line. If he's declining, he would conceal it." Their transport landed on a designated diplomatic pad, where a contingent of royal guards awaited in ceremonial formation. Harrison noted their weapons were ceremonial but regal, an unusual choice for a diplomatic reception. "Ambassador Harrison, Princess Nixera," intoned the lead protocol officer with perfect formality that somehow managed to convey disdain. "The Royal House of Zolaxia acknowledges your presence for the Ascension Festival." "Not welcomes," Harrison noted. "Acknowledges." As they followed their escort through the gleaming corridors of the palace complex, Harrison observed Nixera's subtle reactions. Though she maintained perfect composure, he recognized the slight tension in her shoulders as memories of her childhood resurfaced. The grand reception hall bustled with Zolaxian nobility and foreign dignitaries. Conversations hushed momentarily as Nixera entered, her unique status as both royal blood and official outcast creating a ripple of fascination and discomfort. Her brother, Acting Regent Thrax IV, received them with formal correctness. Taller than Nixera by a head and adorned with military honors, he performed the ritual greetings without meeting her eyes. "The Royal House acknowledges your educational achievements in the human system," he stated for the benefit of listening dignitaries. "I am honored to represent both my Zolaxian heritage and Earth's diplomatic corps." Nixora replied in perfect high Zolaxian, her phrasing diplomatically ambiguous about where her primary loyalties lay. Later, during the formal reception, an elderly Zolaxian female in the simple attire of a royal household servant approached Nixora discreetly. "Nurse Kella," Nixora whispered, recognition flickering in her eyes. "You're still at the palace. Some traditions persist despite changes in leadership," the old woman replied cryptically, her gaze shifting to ensure they weren't observed. The inner gardens remain peaceful during the evening ritual hours. The old pathways remember those who walked them. Before Nixara could respond, Kella bowed formally and retreated into the crowd. That evening, following Kella's veiled suggestion, Harrison and Nixara slipped away from their quarters to the inner gardens. In a secluded alcove hidden behind ancient crystalline growths, Kella awaited them. "What I share risks more than my position," she said without preamble. "You are not alone in your defect, child. Others exist whose empathic capacity survived the purges." "Purges?" Harrison interrupted. "What purges?" "The emotional engineering program 1,000 years ago wasn't universal acceptance, as our history claims," Kella explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was resistance, and then submission. Those who retained the old ways went underground." Nixara's composure faltered. "There are others like me." "A network of us exists throughout the Empire," Kella confirmed. "Some in positions closer to power than anyone suspects. Your father's illness has accelerated plans for transition of power, and your brother's faction grows concerned about genetic instability in the royal line." "Is that why they attempted to reclaim Nixara?" Harrison asked. Kella's aged facial ridges darkened. "Partially. But there's something more. The king has requested your presence tomorrow, alone. He hasn't granted private audience to anyone in months." The emergency session of the Galactic Council erupted into chaos as the holographic display showed another outer colony world falling to the mysterious attackers. 6 worlds lost in 14 days, with no successful defense despite the combined military might of 3 major powers. "The Zolaxian 7th Fleet has been obliterated," announced the hegemony representative, his usual smugness replaced by barely concealed panic. Their shield technology proved ineffective against the invaders' weapons. Harrison, now a senior diplomatic coordinator after years of steadily rebuilding his career, studied the tactical display with growing concern. The Zolaxian fleet had been considered the galaxy's premier military force, their tactical brilliance and technological superiority unchallenged for centuries. "We need to consider unconventional approaches," he suggested, addressing the council chamber. "The traditional military response has proven ineffective." "What would you suggest, Ambassador?" Welcoming them with symbolic gestures, sneered the Zolaxian representative, though his bravado couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. The loss of their fleet had shaken the Empire's confidence to its core. From her observer's position behind the Earth delegation, Nixara studied the attack pattern data scrolling across her tablet. At 20, she had grown into a poised young woman whose unique background made her invaluable to Earth's diplomatic corps, though she held no official position. "Ambassador Harrison," she said quietly, approaching her guardian with the tablet. "I've identified a pattern in the attacks that doesn't align with standard military strategy." Harrison excused himself from the main debate, which had devolved into accusations and recriminations among the major powers. "What have you found?" "The targets appear random from a strategic perspective," Nixara explained, highlighting various data points. "They're not seizing key military installations or population centers. Instead, they're harvesting specific resource combinations in sequences that make no tactical sense." She displayed a comparison chart. "However, when I applied cultural pattern recognition rather than military analysis, I found this correlation with ancient ritual sequences documented in the Xenorchaeological database." Harrison studied her findings with growing interest. "You think these aren't military strikes at all?" "I believe they may be following cultural imperatives we don't understand," Nixara concluded. "Their technology renders our weapons useless, but they're not maximizing territorial gains or population control. When Harrison attempted to present these findings to the Council, the major powers dismissed them outright. "We need military solutions, not cultural theories," the hegemony representative declared, with murmurs of agreement from other major powers. Even the newly crowned King Thrax IV, who had replaced his father after the old king's death, rejected the analysis when Nixera attempted to present it through Zolaxian channels. "The royal court does not accept strategic analysis from genetic anomalies," came the curt response. That evening, in Harrison's diplomatic quarters, Nixera paced with uncharacteristic agitation. "They're making a fundamental error in assuming conventional military intent," she insisted. "These attack patterns follow ritual preparation sequences, not conquest protocols." Harrison watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. "If the Council won't listen, what do you propose?" "We go directly to those who will," Nixera said with sudden decision. "The outer colonies and smaller powers who can't afford the luxury of prejudice when their worlds are threatened." Over the following weeks, while the major powers continued their failed military campaigns, Harrison and Nixera quietly assembled a coalition of lesser species and marginalized groups. Using diplomatic channels established through years of relationship building, they implemented Nixera's defensive strategy on a minor colony world in the invaders' path. When the attackers arrived, they encountered not military resistance, but a carefully arranged resource offering following their own ritual patterns. The attack paused. For the first time since the invasion began, the mysterious ships initiated communication protocols. As news of the successful contact spread, the Galactic Council's attention shifted abruptly. The hegemony representative, who had dismissed Harrison, now demanded details of the approach. King Thrax IV's emissary requested Nixera's presence at an emergency session. "Perhaps," Harrison said with a small smile as they prepared to depart. "They're finally ready to see the value in perspectives they once considered defective." "We come seeking new biomes after environmental collapse," the translator finally rendered the invader's message in standard Galactic Council language after weeks of careful linguistic work. The viewing chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled representatives. Nixera stood before the communication console, her posture perfect as she addressed the holographic figure hovering above the platform. The beam's form was unlike anything in council records. A shifting, crystalline structure with patterns of light pulsing through translucent tissues. "We understand your need for specific resource combinations," she responded, choosing her words carefully. "However, many of these worlds are inhabited by sentient species who cannot survive without their established environments." Harrison watched from nearby, marveling at how far they had come from that first day in the council chamber when a frightened princess had been declared defective. Now, after successfully establishing first contact through her unique protocol, Nixera had been appointed the official negotiation liaison by unanimous council vote, including, remarkably, the Zolaxian delegation. The translator processed the invaders' response. "Our sensory systems detected no communication patterns we recognize as sentience. We believe these sectors uninhabited. Different species perceive reality through different sensory frameworks," Nixera explained, drawing on both her Zolaxian scientific training and her human education in comparative teleology. "What appears as emptiness to one may be rich with life to another." Over the next several hours, a remarkable exchange unfolded. The crystalline beings, who called themselves the Vosheri, had fled their home system after catastrophic environmental changes. Their resource gathering followed specific cultural patterns required by their physiology, explaining the seemingly random attack sequence that had confounded military analysts. "They weren't invading," Harrison explained to the council afterward. "They were preparing habitats according to their biological needs, unaware they were destroying other sentient environments in the process." With understanding replacing fear, Nixera proposed an innovative resource-sharing agreement that would allow the Vosheri to establish settlements in uninhabited systems while providing technological exchange for worlds damaged during the initial misunderstanding. In the council chamber where the galactic powers had once laughed at a human adopting a defective princess, King Thrax IV himself took the unprecedented step of addressing Nyxura directly. The royal house of Zolaxia acknowledges that our assessment was incomplete, he stated formally, carefully avoiding the admission of error while still conveying respect. Your unique perspective has proven valuable to the Empire. Later that day, in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy, Nyxura was formally restored to royal status and named to the ancient position of Bridge Between Worlds, a role mentioned in Zolaxian texts but unfilled for millennia. This position recognizes your ability to connect disparate viewpoints and find harmony where others see only conflict, King Thrax IV explained, clearly reciting words written by cultural historians rather than expressing his own sentiment. As the ceremony concluded and dignitaries swarmed forward to congratulate her, a reporter asked the question on everyone's mind. Princess Nyxura, will you return permanently to Zolaxian now that your royal status has been restored? The chamber quieted as cameras focused on her response. Nyxura looked thoughtfully at Harrison, who stood nearby with quiet pride, before answering. My father taught me that family transcends biology and borders, she said, placing her hand on Harrison's shoulder. He showed me that what others call defects can be our greatest strengths when nurtured properly. She straightened with the dignity of her royal heritage tempered by human warmth. We will serve wherever the galaxy needs us, but Earth gave me something Zolaxia never could, the freedom to become myself. As they departed the council chambers, delegates who had once laughed now stood in respectful silence. Harrison realized they had witnessed something profound, not just the resolution of a crisis, but the beginning of a new understanding of what strength truly meant in a diverse galaxy. You know, he said quietly as they boarded their transport, when I invoked that diplomatic clause all those years ago, I never imagined where it would lead. Nyxura's facial ridges flushed slightly with affection. I believe humans call that parenting. Father.